Hello everyone, I am Tacit, and of course, last Friday we ended up hitting over 100 troops in Gems of War for that gigantic milestone. So today and over the next several days, we will be posting one video per day, going over every single one of those troops. Obviously, most of these descriptions for a good majority of them will be rather brief, as even if we spend like 10 or 20 seconds, we are talking about several hours here of going over all these, but we shall be going through every single one of them. These will be going out while I am away on vacation, so by the time this video is actually out, I will already be gone seeing family, so do be mindful of that. I will get around to comments and stuff, so if you still have any questions about any of the troops or anything within the game, definitely feel free to leave them. Of course, we will be breaking this down by rarity, starting all the way with commons, which is what this video will be going over. So let's start and going over it. So we will go all the way down to commons. As far as commons as a typing, this is a bit of a weird one because commons generally don't come into the game as often as quite a few other rarities. They also have a bit of a weird quirk where quite a few of them are not really even commons, even though they are underneath the common category, mostly because they are obtained by other means, and some of them are actually the hardest troops in the entire game to max, because you actually need 191 copies of a common in order to fully max it, the highest amount of any rarity, and some of them come in at a rather glacial pace. But anyways, let's start from the top with Arctic Fox. He does count as a beast, so he does get up on those random beast summons. He ends up creating a bunch of blue, boosted by frozen enemies, basically never used, not really going to have much of a usage at all. Armored Boar, you basically never use this outside of arena, doesn't have enough damage, does have a nice bit of board control there, does get to do some upfront damage, does have that skull boost ratio, which of course earlier on in the game, any kind of big boost ratio, definitely one you want to be looking out for, and of course those things also do really good in arena. Ori here is the first of the Guild War troops. These are one of the 6 that just randomly come in through Guild Wars, which now occurs at this current moment in time once every 4 weeks. As far as this troop, it's basically never used. All the basic premise of them is they get 5 to all stats of a certain color, which gets increasingly worse over time as stats get higher, and also gets to do damage to an enemy, and if there's 13 or more green, gets to do triple damage and create the color storm of whatever color it is. Overall, pretty underwhelming and never really gets used. Baby Dragon's kind of interesting, definitely one that you'll want to have upgraded. Quite a few ways to get it in play. It ends up doing some random damage, but then transforms into any random dragon into the game. This is one of the main reasons why you want to have almost every single dragon, at least epic and below, or definitely ultra rare and below, upgraded, mostly because you can end up getting the baby dragon to become it, and then it gets those little bit of extra stats. Overall, it's not something you would actively use into your team. However, there are quite a few ways to get it onto your team. The most common probably being Egg Thief, where you end up summoning it off of egg, and then the egg ends up becoming baby dragon, and then that baby dragon ends up becoming some kind of other dragon. You could also end up getting a dragon soul and have it come in with full mana and such, but overall you're never actually using it into your team, it just gets generated into your team. Another one that is like that is Bandit, and is arguably one of the strongest commons in the entire game. Used to be a pretty good arena pick as well, however a little bit less so. They actually did a nerf to it last December, and this nerf actually buffed it, which is kind of funny. This nerf ended up making its mana cost go from 8 to 11, which is in essence, yes, entirely a nerf. However, in doing so, they allowed you to refund a troop. This is a mechanic that happens whenever they end up nerfing a troop, and this refund ended up making Bandit one of the strongest, if not the strongest common in the entire game. This is mostly because Hero Class has the chance to summon it at a 35% chance, and if you have ever seen my Guild War videos, you know that this happens like 1.5 billion times. And one thing that's kind of interesting about this is that the Hero Class ability, of course, affects every single time when it ends up triggering a death, so it has a 35% chance every single time to end up being replaced by a bandit. However, the hero classes that have this 35% chance to summon, they all have stealthy. So one thing that you can actually do if you have a bandit that does not specifically have stealthy is it will get summoned, of course, without stealthy, which means they will have to target that bandit instead of targeting your hero, which is absolutely insane how strong it is. Unfortunately, it is impossible to have it both fully metalled while also having it without stealthy unless you were able to get this refund back then. Otherwise, you would just mostly want to make sure your bandit is not stealthy, though you will not be able to gold medal it or get any medals on it due to that being exclusive only to the refund thingy that they did several months back. So not sure exactly what they're going to do with this. There's actually a lot of traits within the game where the troop would be stronger without it, but overall Bandit pretty much strongest common due to its capability off of hero class and the fact that it just keeps getting summoned like crazy. Mostly done with the thief hero class, however there are other hero classes that can end up utilizing the effect. This thing basically destroys some gems and then entangles a random enemy. There are much better things underneath commons that have way more destroys as well as other rarities. So Bogue Strider basically is never used due to the other options as being better. Bombot used to be pretty meta, still can be on occasion. It's basically kind of like a guard's avatar in a sense, in that it's boosted by its armor and ends up doing a really big heavy AoE to the opposing team. It's a common, so a lot more accessible than guard's avatar, and it's mostly just not used because it does end up destroying itself. However, there are ways to end up summoning quite a bit off of mech builds now, so a little bit more viable than it used to be, though overall not really getting used. Can be used as like a big burst in arena if you want, though it can be a bit risky. Bone Scorpion, pretty useless. This kind of has a random bit of poison on it, not really ever going to get much usage due to other poisons being better. Brownie just destroys some gems, creates some purples. The way that it ends up doing so is okay to somewhat have a okay chance to get an extra turn. However, there are things that destroy more consistently, like a column, a row, while also creating gems that are a little bit more consistent at being able to get those extra turns from the gem spawn, simply because they make the board smaller in a more consistent way than just randomly destroying 7 of them. Plus, they end up destroying more overall, because if you're destroying a row or a column, that will end up doing 8 destroys, not 7 like he does. As far as Centaur Scout, just kind of standard, destroy a row, do some damage. Overall, pretty average, not really something you would end up doing unless you just end up drafting in an arena. The Chupacabra just has too low of a chance to really bother countering beasts correctly, so it is never really going to be used as a beast counter. Even if you're up against a pure beast team, it is just not viable. Coin Purse is one of the first, or maybe not first, there's already some weird ones, but it's one of the weird commons. There's quite a few commons, of course, underneath this category. It's basically a useless tier troop that is just obtained by the treasure hoards in the underworld. Basically, you use it for no other purpose than to go and upgrade your treasure hoards, and Coin Purse in particular is the lowest amount of points, which makes it the absolute most useless treasure. Hopefully it'll add some kind of way to upgrade them into the future, and by upgrade I mean, you know, making them into bigger treasures. You can max it out if you truly wanted to. However, there's really no benefit to doing so other than just for completionist sake. Courage. So Courage is one of the first of the 6 seal keys troops end up coming into the game. There are 12 of them currently, and this was within the first batch. Ends up creating a mix of red and whatever you choose, and then ends up increasing your attack and is boosted by burning. Every single one of these are pretty viable, though not so much in the current state of the game, just because their consistency of extra turning is quite a bit less than other things that exist within the game. However, overall, pretty nice damage. Ends up gaining attack, has the capability of targeting skulls, has the capability of targeting doom skulls, so can end up getting a decent amount of damage in that regard. Creeper, basically useless, just some damage with disease, never really going to get used. Cunning is one of the ones that was added in the second batch of those seal keys. Pretty decent, has a 50% score reduction, ends up having a little bit of Rashka bonus, which can have a couple synergies over the higher damaging Rashkas. Has some countering to purple, so you can end up seeing it on Purple Guild War Day, and ends up doing the boost based on its life, which, of course, if you have a lot of life, or if you're doing a life-spamming team, can end up getting quite a bit of damage, especially with the extra damage that it does to purple. Daemon Gnome has the highest mana cost in the entire game. It's the first of these Vault troops that are specifically obtained from Vault keys. These are the hardest troops in the entire game to max. As you can see, I currently only have 13 of the 191 copies you need to fully max it. These are basically impossible to max without using a major blue on. Even if you just tried opening a bunch of Vault keys until you could use a small blue on it, you would still need to get 91 copies, which of course is pretty impossible. It's still technically possible, but you know, it's very hard to do, though now that they buffed Nomapalooza, or buffed Vault events with Nomapalooza, who knows, maybe it will. But it basically gets to kill random enemy, kind of like a Zugoth, except way worse. It also will end up running away once it does so, and can only be cast once, so you can't just use multiple of it. It's completely useless, you would never actually use this on the team, and that's kind of the theme with pretty much every single one of the gnomes that are obtained from the Vault keys that happen to be commons. They are all just completely useless and never going to be used. As far as Defiance, this is another one of the second batch of the seal key ones. Pretty decent, has the, it's basically all of them do a relatively similar premise. They all have their little bit extra stats to a certain type. In this one, Case or Scale, which is okay typing, has 50% score reduction, has the double to brown, has the other double to brown. They all kind of do the same kind of premise, just in a slightly different way. Direwolf, pretty decent troop. He has a stacking multiplier. There's actually another common that is pretty interesting in that it can stack up to 8 times damage. The way that they do stack fully into each other. So if you have a 2 times into 2 times, that'll be 4 times, and if you have a 2 times into 2 times into 2 times, that would actually be an 8 times multiplier to how much damage you end up doing. So they do fully stack, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, he can end up doing 4 times damage because he has both an Entangle and Hunter's Mark, and he has the double damage off of Entangle. Also some Skull Dodge. Pretty decent overall troop. Couple things that can summon him as well. And overall, not that bad. Definitely one of the stronger commons when it comes to skulls. The next 6 are all Dooms. These are relatively hard to get in the current state of the game. They used to be a little bit easier to max when the event happened once every 4 weeks. However, in the current state of the game, it happens once every 11 weeks, which makes these things exceedingly annoying to max, and it actually is required to max them, unlike some of the Vault troops, or all the Vault troops, which aren't associated to any kind of kingdom or anything. All 6 of these dooms are specifically associated to a kingdom, so they are required for kingdom upgrading purposes, which is a little bit annoying, as these are one of the harder things that are required for kingdom upgrading purposes to actually get max, more so because of how artificially low the cycle for Doom events are. It takes currently over a year for every single Doom event to cycle the colors, so yeah, that's kind of unfortunate with how it's set up. Hopefully they will change that. It's been away for almost a year now, since season started last September last year, so hopefully it'll do some kind of update at some point to end up fixing that. Main gimmick with these is that they have invulnerable. They are one of only 8 troops, I believe, in the game, 8 or 9 in the current state. I think it's 8, but the 6 of them basically make up a good majority of them. However, they aren't really used, even though they have this perk. Main reason being is they have a really high mana cost and don't really do much with their ability at all. They do have a little bit of like a death mark mechanic on their final trait. However, there are things that do that a little bit better, and they do count as dooms, and they are only 6 troops in the game, these 6 that count as dooms. And this is a little bit bad because there's a lot of really good weapons within the game that are already good even if you're not facing a doom, that are insanely good if you are facing a doom. So generally they're not really used for any purpose whatsoever. You're generally going to be using like the mythic version of the invulnerable troops or something else, and not really bother with these, as they are just way too weak for what they offer and can be hard countered. Dragon eggs, you would never actually use into your team. However, Egg Thief ends up making this a pretty good option because it's a really good mana accumulator that can then end up summoning this as a gigantic meat shield, and then it can end up summoning a baby dragon that then becomes any dragon in the game. So overall, that cycle is just one of the pieces of that cycle you would never use in your team. However, it's a pretty good option. Dwarven Gate's pretty funny because you get to basically infinite anything that has a 15 mana cost or lower. Basically what you do, it's not like a true infinite because you give the enemy the turn constantly. However, you have so much durability that it can kind of do it as long as they don't have instant kills or anything too annoying. Basically what it does is if you have 3 of them onto your team, you can end up using this to end up giving 5 mana to all other allies, which if you keep cycling it will end up getting back its 10 mana after you end up cycling through the Dwarven Gates. And it would also fill something else that has a 15 mana cost or less, like some kind of hero weapon or some kind of decent troop that has 15 mana cost or less, will get them to full mana. So you can kind of cycle this. Most common method with this is Tesla, because you end up getting the armor boost ratio. So if you have a Tesla laying around, you could do it with that. However, you could do it with pretty much anything within the game. Also, using one of them isn't bad. You're still getting a barrier onto all your other allies, plus giving them a little bit of mana. It's also used pretty commonly in Arena if you get in as one of your last picks and you don't have blue yet. Pretty good option to put in there. Dwarven Miner, he got changed like 6 years back to have quite a bit of a gold chance if he ends up hitting that. There are more consistent ways of doing that though, like off of Greed, off of Rare, so there really isn't any use to him because Greed can do it off of Empower, and there's really no need to end up using Dwarven Miner. He does have a little bit of a Destroy, but other Destroys are just way better, and overall he just lacks in both those categories compared to other options that exist within the game. Frosty, another one of these kind of just all-out counter kind of troops, so he specifically does it for red. Probably one of the more useful ones as well, because red has quite a bit less durability, and he does have boost ratio basically off of all his stats, since he naturally does it off of magic, and he also does it off of the other 3, so really intimidating in Red Guild Wars, and arguably the strongest of the 6 of this category of troops, so definitely worth considering for a Red Guild War counter. Festival Cal basically just used a troll in PvP defend. Is a very useless troop that is basically just done with 3 times Firebomb, if just to kind of have a different a variable in it. You're never really actually going to be using this troop. It's not really ever going to give anything a benefit enough to bother justify using. So, Finesse. Another one of these seal key opening troops. This one ends up doing a, it's probably the most useful of them, actually. Ends up dealing double damage to yellow, has the kind of same premise, 50% score reduction as we were just talking about. However, the main gimmick that he has that makes him very viable is he ends up using, or ends up gaining 6 mana to all other allies whenever there's a yellow storm. This is kind of like Dwarven Gate, except way better, because unlike Dwarven Gates, while this does have a condition of needing to have that yellow storm, you could easily do that with Stormcaller, which also has strict synergy, so even more synergy there. However, it's basically just like a superior Dwarven Gate, because he gets to do damage to 2 enemies, while also being able to go and do double against yellows, while also being able to cycle 6 mana, meaning you can use up to an 18 mana cost weapon, and it does have to be a weapon in this case, because you do have to be using Stormcaller for that yellow storm. However, there are a lot of really good weapons that are 18 mana costs or lower, particularly in the Doom weapon category, but even just in general. So that's pretty much every weapon in the game, with a few exceptions that happen to be a little bit higher than that. There are very few that are actually over a 18 mana cost, so a lot of value that you can end up getting thing there, as it basically allows you to spam any weapon in the entire game while also doing a ridiculous amount of damage. It's probably one of the easiest ways to get through yellow factions if you haven't already been utilizing it. You wouldn't really use it outside of that method for the most part, though, just because other things kind of outpass it. Firebomb used to be pretty meta, however, in the current state of the game, Leprechaun is the superior in every possible way. The only reason you would ever use this is to troll in Guild War Defend in order to try to get more battles, because whenever you lose, you get a revenge battle, which is actually better loot than winning, which is rather ironic, which is why you see a lot of firebombs in PvP. It also just makes easy battles for people to win if they want to go farm. So yeah, keep an eye out for firebombs. If you want to set some on your defend, feel free to do so. If you do a lot of PvP, it is more beneficial to set a really weak team like Festival Cal into 3 firebombs or 4 firebombs. Reason why sometimes a variable troop is used is the game does have something where it tries to not match you against the exact same teams, and if a lot of people are using 4 times firebombs, it will keep facing you against the 4 times firebombs. So you kind of just want to switch it up occasionally. Anyways, as far as Fortress Gate, it's pretty useless. There's so many other gates. It was the first of all the gates in the game. However, every other gate is stronger than this thing, so it doesn't really get used too much. If I'm not mistaken, it is actually the highest durability troop in the entire game. I can't actually remember if it still is in the current state of the game. This isn't really too relevant because it doesn't have any kind of skull or spell reduction. However, as far as just base stats, I'm pretty sure it's overall highest if you take the 2 numbers together, while also having impervious. So there's that. Frostling, this was the other troop I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the Direwolf. This ends up having a really interesting amount of damage. The main reason for this is it gets to freeze and web an enemy, and if there's 13 more blue, gain 4 mana. That's main relevant thing there is that it gets to freeze and web. Main reason why that is relevant, well, it normally wouldn't be. However, if you look at these 2 traits, it has double damage to webbed enemies as well as double damage to frozen enemies, meaning you can get 4 times damage. However, if they are hunters marked, that 4 times damage will become 8 times damage. So you'll be able to hit for ridiculously high numbers, basically one-shotting anything that is inflicted with webbed, frozen, and hunter's mark. Obviously, that getting that much setup can be pretty annoying to do. However, if you were to do it, it has the highest single target skull damage in the entire game if you can actually get that set up consistently. It'd be rather interesting to see what will happen if we ever get a mythic that has the capability of both freezing and webbing simultaneously, as not only is that a really good combo to make sure that the enemy won't really be able to cast or loop or anything like that, but it would also allow Frostling to become absurdly meta out of nowhere. Currently, it's just too inconsistent to try to get that many effects. However, that might not be the case in the future, so definitely something to keep an eye on. As far as gold, it's pretty useless. You basically just draft an arena, no other reason to really use in your team. It's got reworked quite a bit in the past and is basically useless in its current state. Giant Crab, another one of those that you're basically just going to be using an arena, just has like a double tap kind of thing. It does have a little bit of a switching. Nice to see enemies that have the capability of moving the enemy team. However, it's not really particularly viable. Speaking about things that can move the entire the enemy team, Giant Toad, main reason why you want to have this upgraded, other than the fact that it counts as a beast, is there's a 10% chance on some weapons, most notably Essence of Evil, to end up changing your enemy or changing the first slot into a Giant Toad. And you do want your Giant Toad to be upgraded if you can, just because you do gain a little bit extra stats if you were to ever be countered by Essence of Evil. And while it's not going to make too huge a difference, it's better to have a little bit extra stats, as the main locations you're going to be finding those is PvP and particularly Guild Wars, so it's nice to have a little bit extra stats to try to win Guild Wars. Anyways, Giant Toadstool basically just has a little bit of a transform. It can somewhat loop it, however, it's just such a low chance compared to other things that exist within the game, mostly because it's a slight looping capability, even though it's not a perfect loop. But basically, it's too unviable to use. You're never really going to be using this thing, and overall, not really that good. Glaive Warden at one point was the strongest troop in the game back when it had a 100% chance of doing true damage on skull while also having dodge, both of which it doesn't have anymore. It no longer has 20% dodge, nor does it have the 100% because all that traits got nerfed down to 50%, while there is still something that can do 100%, Lord or Slaughter. All the commons and lower rarity things that used to have it do not have it anymore, and overall it's just really bad. He denies his own color, which is just very weird. Another one here, another one, the Vault Troops. They're all kind of the same thing. They're just all useless commons that are exceedingly hard to end up maxing out. Goblin here, pretty nice for 6 mana cost. He has a, similar to all goblins, he has an automatic extra turn, and he just ends up doing some poke damage. If I'm not mistaken, you still get him during the tutorial. Not sure if that is the case still in the current state of the game. However, of everything that you get in the tutorial, assuming you still get him in the tutorial, he's actually the strongest of the options you get. So if nothing else, you kind of use him a little bit when you're first starting out, and then you basically never use him again because obviously you do get better options. However, of the tutorial stuff that you get, he is the strongest of them. Anyways, as far as Golem, used to be a little bit better. However, he does have the gimmick of having like some 50% score reduction with a little bit of brown mana there. Overall, still pretty bad. Has a little bit of a way to eliminate armor. However, once they have ran out of armor, there's basically nothing you could end up doing with it, so it kind of just falls off and becomes useless. Not even really used in Arena because his best perk is basically his traits, and obviously you don't have traits in Arena. This thing doesn't end up doing much. It has a little bit of a boost ratio. However, it's not enough to really justify using it. You might end up using it a little bit in Arena, but aside from that, it's not really going to get much usage otherwise. Honor basically keeps getting weaker over time because it is one of those ones that just ends up gaining a bunch of stats, gains 10 to all skills when used in PvP. One thing to keep in mind is Guild War does count as PvP, so it does end up gaining that benefit if you do end up using it in that location. Though overall, just pretty underwhelming. Ends up creating and giving a bunch of armor. Biggest issue with this is a lot of the stuff that it would actually get used with that have an armor boost ratio do end up using brown. The one exception to that being Rowain, which doesn't. However, there are more viable things like Urskia Shield that you would use instead, basically making Honor completely useless in comparison to just using a hero with Urskia Shield. Not only would you be able to gain hero class XP, but it's overall better and only costs 1 mana cost more. So Honor basically obsolete in the current state of the game. Humility is rather interesting as it's still one of the most consistent ways to get magic to your entire team in the entire game. This would actually become extremely meta if there was ever to be a way to bleed or poison your entire team. There is the troop that we haven't gotten to yet, which is Leshi down here, which allows you to entangle your entire team. However, if we ever get something that has the capability of pasting the negative positive effect of poison or bleed onto our team, you can basically use the negative effect as a positive effect in order to constantly trigger your perk. And in this case, all allies gain 2 armor and magic when I take damage to life. So if you were able to get this thing poisoned and or bled, ideally just one of them so he takes less damage, every single turn you will end up triggering his ability to give magic to your entire team. And on top of the fact that he can end up giving even more magic, yeah, it's quite a bit of magic that you can end up gaining from it. Obviously, it's random if he ends up gaining magic off of that. However, his trait, if you get a poisoned, bled, or just taking damage in general to his HP, will end up giving a very consistent amount of magic. And while it's a relatively low amount of magic, it is unconditionally giving it to your entire team. So you don't have to worry about it just going to like a random one and just hitting the wrong one. It will go to the entire team. So overall, from the ones that you end up getting from seals, definitely one of the more viable ones to end up using. Hyena basically not used for anything other than Arena, mostly because it has a multi-resummon, though it's resummoning something that's very useless. However, in Arena, that's not bad because everything is useless. Ice Worm, category of one of those kind of looping troops. These worms actually aren't too bad. They can be really good options as you're progressing through the game. They're also really good options in Arena because they can loop a little bit into themselves. They also hit the last enemy, which of course, hitting the last 2, particularly the 3rd slot, can be a little bit hard to do. So if this thing can just kill out the last enemy and then start hitting the 3rd slot, it can end up targeting out off of AI as well, one of the harder to kill locations. Overall, it's basically just an Arena pick. You won't really use it much outside of that. Innkeeper doesn't really give enough attack to really justify what it does. Just gives some attack and then lowers your magic by 1. Overall, not really going to be doing much. There's just better attackers, and generally buffing in general isn't really that viable. Gnomes, they're all useless, so it's another one for the pet category. Actually, that's not true. Cedric is not useless, but most of them, at least all the common ones, are useless. So for this video, every single gnome is useless. Anyways, Justice at one point was the strongest troop in the entire game. Rather interesting compared to all of these other similar double gem creating vault key, or not vault key, seal key guardians. And the main thing that's kind of interesting about this is it ends up double boosting. So all the other ones only gain 1 stat. Like for example, with Humility it was a random stat. With Courage it was armor, or attack, I mean, whichever one is rich. Honor it was armor. But you know, they all only gain 1 stat. What's kind of interesting about this is this has the exact same boost ratio as all the other ones. However, it gains 2 stats, both HP and attack. So this is rather interesting because it's basically gaining double the amount of value from boost ratio. Also, the effect that it ends up boosting off of is a pretty useful one. It ends up boosting based off of freeze. There's also a freeze burn in the current state of the game that would allow you to use both Justice and Courage in order to have the boost ratio both off of freeze and burning to end up gaining 2 different ways of gaining attack while just spamming the skulls while also creating blue and red, both of which feed back into the troop that also freezes and burns them. The Frostfire or something, I forget his name. It's the legend from the Frostfire Keep, and has some synergy there. Used to be used with Queen Mab, however, definitely better with the Frostfire Keep Legend. And overall, not really used in the current state of the game. It definitely has fallen from grace. Was at one point the strongest thing in the entire game, though it's still viable if you're lacking option. You just go get the Legend from Frostfire Keep, get it fully traded, use this thing, and boom, you got yourself a team, and you just kind of build around that. Kofeshi is basically just a weaker version of Rope Dart that happens to be a common. You'd basically never really use this thing. It's pretty useless, doesn't have any damage on anything, just kind of moves them. Lance Knight, I'm pretty sure you still get this in a tutorial. It's not really too useful though, just destroys a rogue, gains some armor, boosted by green. Even in arena, you wouldn't really bother using this thing, just not really worth it. A lot of knights have a lot of armor and are pretty bulky and just aren't really worth it because they just completely get obliterated by true damage and don't really have enough damage themselves. Leshi, I was kind of mentioning earlier, he's one of only a few troops that can place a negative status effect onto your own team. Entangling your own team can actually be beneficial, and Leshi is one of the stronger utility troop commons, even though it's not really used too often. The main gimmick that you can do with entangling your own team is, that might seem like it's bad, however, there are things that do damage based on how much attack you have. For example, things like Charm, that makes you hit the troop above and troop below based on how much attack your troop has, that ends up getting hit by the Charm. However, if it has 0 attack because it's been entangled, it will end up doing 0. One other thing that's actually rather interesting is you can't lose attack while you're entangled. So if you're using this on a team that has cleanse, while the enemy team has a lot of attack reduction, while this isn't really a build that's really used in the current state of the game, if the enemy happen to have a lot of ways to attack reduce you, you could use Leshi in order to protect your attack value. Then on your turn, when you actually want to start using some skull spam or something else, end up using a cleanse. This could be used really well in the past with Divine Ishbala because it had a way to do skulls while also having cleanse. However, that's not the case anymore. However, we might get some kind of viable synergy into the future that might be able to do that, though the attack reduction meta isn't really a thing. Attack reduction isn't really something that's used too often. The only thing that kind of does it is Wild Queen. However, it's used situationally enough that you don't really need a hard counter a Wild Queen just by using this. However, it would hard counter Wild Queen if nothing else, as not only would it not be able to steal your attack, but it also wouldn't be able to gain its attack. Plus, it wouldn't be able to do anything with all of its skulls. So this has some viability, as it basically just hard counters that mythic, though it's not really used too often, and it's very exceedingly situational, not something you would just plop onto a defend team, since it's basically useless if the enemy team is not using a team that is specifically hard countered by it. Anyways, this is another one, the Guardian ones from Seal Keys. This one ends up doing life, quite a bit weaker than the other ones. However, there are some synergies just by the fact that it ends up doing green. Mad Prophet has the potential to potentially be good. However, they made its magic gain too low. If its magic gain was also based on half of its magic, it would actually be somewhat okay. It would be a consistent way to potentially get a little bit of magic, though even in that case, probably wouldn't be too worth it just because it has such a ridiculously high mana cost. Overall, you're not really going to be using this thing. It's just not viable compared to other mana accumulators. You compare this to something like Thrall, and his ability looks completely laughable. You can only use it once. It's not even enough to get most mythics to full mana, and it's only 5 magic, which is pretty pitiful as the game goes on, as it becomes increasingly less amount of value. I really wish a lot of these troops would get some kind of scaling method, because a lot of these things that end up doing that aren't really updated, and if they had some kind of half boost ratio or something similar, would end up fixing that, kind of like how his mana gain does, except even that's still not enough compared to other options. The Mammoth, you wouldn't really bother using. It's mostly just a arena pickup. You end up doing some damage. Hits both, removes all blues, but then also gets to deal damage to both the enemy's life and armor, which is kind of interesting. Obviously, it does a bit less if it does not have any armor left. However, it can end up stacking quite a bit of damage otherwise. This also basically means it does true damage in a sense, in that it's doing true damage directly to its life while also getting rid of some of its armor. So if you have like a mixed team, can end up kind of coming in a little bit, however, not really used that often and just not really that viable. Maybe an arena pick, but overall, even for that, probably not going to be using. Mecha Gnome's useless. It's just one of those common gnomes. Moa's also useless. It's just some damage with a stun. I believe it was also the first troop in the entire game added that happened to have a stunning capability. There was 2 that was kind of added. It was the first one that had it off ability. The other one had it, I believe, off a skull. It was one of the trolls, I believe. Musketeer, completely useless outside of arena. However, it's actually a really good arena pickup. If you ever see Musketeer, it's a pretty consistent way to actually win arena if you're looking to win them a bit more often, just for objectives and if you're doing your dailies with it. It ends up just dealing some damage to an enemy, which is pretty much like the most basic ability that could even exist, because it's in one of the earlier kingdoms, so a lot of them have some pretty basic ones. However, the main thing that's really viable is it uses only 6 mana cost in order to get to full mana, and it can target any enemy, so it's really consistent with how much damage it could do. And if you're later in the game at a point where you have 60% plus chance to surge on reds, this can obviously be pretty beneficial for how much control you can end up having in arena. Since you just take a red, you're normally going to get full mana off it, and then you can just start musketeering. So pretty consistent. Can even use it to kind of pass your turn. Not really using it outside of arena. However, inside arena, pretty good option. Mizmer, one of these guild-related ones from Guild Wars, so it's a little bit hard to get since Guild Wars only occurs once every 4 weeks, so I believe that does cycle in pretty much half a year, so it's not as annoying as the Doom troops. However, still can be pretty annoying to end up getting all the way max. It's useless as all of the 6 of them are, so nothing really too much to mention there. Nightmare, one of the hero classes actually ends up summoning this, not sure why. Ends up creating 5 red gems boosted by burning enemies, so it can get an okay amount of red spam if the entire enemy team is burnt. However, it does not use red mana itself, so it does not feed into itself, so it is not that viable compared to quite a bit of other mana accumulators. North Render can be okay just because it ends up creating a little bit of blue while also gaining its attack. Not really used too often, however, it does have a little bit of synergy with Valkyrie and a couple other things. Overall, not too good compared to many other options that exist underneath higher rarities. However, it can be good for arena, especially if you have a good blue troop that you have drafted prior. Now that you draft commons last and ultra rares, epics first, this makes it a little bit more viable because you already know if you're going to have a good blue on your team. So you can end up picking as a pretty strong arena option that can go in your first slots with a really high attack value, though obviously doesn't gain as much in arena, but still a competent amount. And while also being able to feed blue into whatever your other troop is, can also be used in second slot in order to build up that attack while also having a safer amount of blue mana accumulation. Ogre is completely useless, however, it does have the high space stats of any common within arena, so it's a great arena pick. Aside from that, we got Ogre over here, another one of these Guild War troops, completely useless in the current state of the game, not really going to be used. There's just other things that do it way better, like those Guardian troops that end up doing the extra damage to hard counter color, so don't really bother needing something like Ogre or any of the other 6 Guild War related options. This is the worst of pretty much the orcs, not really going to end up doing much. It just gains some attack, transforms green to brown, and to boost itself, and then just enrages. It's not really going to be doing much, it just kind of dies. Has a little bit of a link to kind of make it a little bit better, but overall not something you'd bother ever using. Ryan Herald, not something you would actively put onto your team, because if you have a Ryan, it's better just to put a Ryan there than to bother with a Ryan's Herald. However, you sometimes take it up in arena just to have a legend to summon. It is, I believe, one of the only 100% chances, if not the only 100% chance, especially off a common, to end up getting a legend into arena. There are multiple ways that you could do so, however, this is a 100% chance every single time he casts. You'll end up getting a legend, and those legends, of course, have higher stats, and yeah, it can be okay, pretty high mana cost, but outside of arena, you're never going to use it, since just using a Ryan instead is better, obviously, if you have a Ryan. Peasant, another one of those weird troops, which I feel like a lot of people underestimate how ridiculously good this troop is. If he had some more follow-up on his ability, he would actually be pretty meta. He destroys a gem and then destroys the gems on either side of it. This might not seem like much, but the fact that he only has a 3 mana cost, which is tied at the lowest in the entire game, while also being able to do a very unique board control that no other troop in the entire game has, because you can actually do this for 2 destroy in order to set up moves that you would never be able to do. Like if you had 2 elevated ones into 2 lower ones that you then do all the way to the left side, and then that cascades down, and boom, you just got a 4 times extra turn. And there's a lot of really weird gimmicky board control stuff that you can end up doing with him. He's absolutely absurd how good he is in arena. However, outside of arena, he isn't really too good, as the only good perk he really has that isn't his ability is Jinx, and you're normally better off just with really heavy mana accumulation and abilities that could just kind of keep looping forever and not really bother with something that could just do some really gimmicky kind of board control stuff. However, he is very strong in arena and is definitely really great as your final pick option. Penguin, another one of those Guild War ones, kind of useless, never really going to get used. Penitent, double Def Mark, kind of a okay way to apply Def Mark if you're earlier on in the game. Aside from that, you're never really going to be using this. You can also use it as an RNG option in Arena. However, I think he kills himself in like 2 or 3 hits in Arena, so not really too viable, as you're basically killing off one of your troops just for a chance to kill out one of the enemy teams. And, you know, with your luck, probably will never get a Def Mark kill. So, yeah, overall, Penitent, just kind of useless. So it is the best Def Marker that you can get for very cheap, if nothing else. Anyways, as far as Persistence, it's another one of those ones that have the double. It's mostly the green Guild War counter. Has War Gear synergy. Unfortunately, War Gear is pretty underwhelming hero type currently. Maybe once we get a War Gear hero class, this thing could start seeing some play. However, in the current state of the game, it's one of the more underused ones of this specific category that you end up getting from seal keys. However, it does have potential to be good in the future. Another one, the Guild War one's completely useless. Another one of the pet gnomes, completely useless. Pride Hunter can be pretty good in arena if nothing else. Has a silence the first slot. Obviously, there's much better silencers later into the game. Though silence not really a mechanic used too often, oddly enough, in the current state of the game, though it is still pretty effective. There just isn't really too many good viable options for it. This is really good in arena, but outside of arena, you're never going to really bother using it. Priestess is just really underwhelming for a buffing troop. It's a kind of continuing theme with pretty much every single buffing troop in the entire game, in that if they do not have border control, they are basically useless as a buffing troop. It does have cleanse, does have armor, does have barrier to whatever it targets. However, it doesn't do it to itself, so it can end up dying as it's trying to buff someone else and just wasting your entire turn just to put a buff buff onto something is useless in almost every single situation in the entire game. Quasit basically just eliminates them from a random skill. You do end up getting this from a couple different ways as far as how it gets summoned, so it is worth getting fully upgraded if nothing else. However, you would never actively use it on your team. He just kind of gets put onto your team randomly occasionally through a couple effects within the game. Reaver has an okay amount of damage, mostly used in arena, particularly if you already have a webbing option and you end up seeing this thing as a common. You would definitely want to pick it up, especially if that webbing option does not specifically use green, though even if it does, you can still get quite a bit extra damage, basically double one-shot twice in arena. So very situational because it requires web to do so. However, if you end up getting that mechanic in arena, it can be pretty good. Remnant, basically useless. There's an ultra rare that ends up summoning it, and that's basically the only reason it would ever be on your team. You might want to upgrade it if you're ever going to be using that troop. However, you're basically never really going to be using that troop. I believe it's called Dark Priest? No, I actually forget its name. But there's a troop that summons either that or the red-blue from Darkstone. And overall, don't really want to... You wouldn't really bother wanting to mention... You wouldn't really want to bother putting it onto your team. Anyways, Rock, I believe third highest mana cost common. Actually, I'm not sure. There's quite a few that have like these one cast only. It's an interesting gimmick within the game that I wish was a little bit more viable. A lot of these aren't really balanced too well. Almost every single thing that can be casted only once, except for maybe Archdiva in the current state of the game, is pretty underwhelming. This thing can be okay in arena, but outside of it, not really going to be doing much. It just does a bunch of damage, gains a bunch of attack, can only be used once, but has a ridiculously high mana cost. There's just better options out there, like something like Humility or something else would even end up overall being better in that value slot, and overall just way too clunky to bother using, as is pretty much all of them that have a similar mechanic. Rockworm under the worm category ends up doing some damage to last slot. It ends up creating some of its color, can loop a little bit, mostly just using arena. Sacrifice, one of the weirdest of all of the Guardian troops that is within the first batch of what they added. Has the capability of giving you a lot of magic and is actually one of the more consistent ways of gaining magic within the game. However, one of the big downsides to this is it does end up destroying your ally every single time you end up doing this. So it ends up killing your last ally every single time. So you basically have to have a resummoning option that can also end up feeding mana back into this. Of course, as time goes on, we get increasingly more. Like, for example, this season, we have a way of creating a bunch of purple lycanthropy gems that can then end up feeding the entire team with magic. However, it's not too viable with that, just because they don't actually gain a benefit from magic. They're more of a skull-oriented kind of setup, whereas this thing, obviously, giving magic doesn't really help that too much. However, there are things that can end up creating purple while also having a summon. That can end up synergizing this a little bit. Overall, not really worth it just to buff up your magic just to get a cast off, as there's just other loops out there that are already pressuring damage better and basically make sacrifice obsolete. However, it is a pretty interesting way of gaining magic, if nothing else. Sandcroper, you never use. I believe there's something that can summon it. However, you would never use in arena because most of its effects don't even really do much. You wouldn't use it outside of arena because it's useless. So unless it kind of gets put onto your team off a summon, you're not really going to be using it. Satyr is kind of like Goblin, except it only ends up doing damage to the last slot, unless they change it. Wait, did they change his ability? Let's see. Never mind. They actually do made it. So, oh no, it is last enemy. Never mind, it's still last enemy. So it's basically just like a goblin that does like a little bit more, but it has a higher mana cost. It's basically just an alternative goblin for the most part. Some situations it can be slightly better than goblin, though overall they're both still pretty useless. Scale guard used to be a little bit better. Used to be able to actually get its mana at Empower, if I'm not mistaken. They actually nerfed it down to 75% at one point, just so we didn't really have that Empower synergy. But he does end up doing double the poison, can end up one-shotting some stuff in some game modes if they're already poisoned easily off a reality or something else that has a decent poison option. Overall, not really something you'd use in the current state of the game. Ever since they got rid of its Empower, it has basically been useless, or at least a lot less viable. Though it can still be okay in arena, especially if you already have another poisoning option, since traits would always have been disabled in arena anyways. Sentry Bot ends up destroying all of a choosing ally's color and then gives them a bunch of armor. Overall, pretty bad. I believe there is one thing that can end up summoning this, though if that's pretty much the only reason you'd ever have it on your team. Serpent can end up doing a little bit of red, mostly just using arena. Does have a double poison, so has some poison synergy there, which also is pretty good in arena since poison's a bit more effective there. However, overall, not really too interesting, and there's obviously way better ways of getting red onto your team. Ship Cannon, rather interesting in that it gets to hit so many random enemies, though it's really inconsistent and you wouldn't really bother using it compared to many other browns in the game. Once again, okay in arena, though beyond that, not really used. Silver Draken, the only reason you'd ever have this upgraded or anything in general is because you'd get it off of Christine X. You would never actually use this onto your team, you would just have it as a Christine X summon. When it does does get summoned off of Christinax. It's not completely useless. It does have that blue link that might seem odd on it, though it does go directly into Christinax itself, while also being able to create a bunch of blue mana, which of course synergizes into Christinax. Once again, you'd never actually use it on your team, but it synergizes decently back into Christinax, of which Christinax summons consistently. So at least it has that kind of synergy there. Skeleton, oddly enough, actually really good. I don't feel like it's currently used too much in the current meta of the game. However, it is not bad at all, and has some rather interesting synergies as we keep getting more and more options. For example, one weird synergy, of course, once again, is the most recent mythic that we end up getting, Satyr and Scroll. That can end up creating a bunch of purple gems, which feeds into this, which also does Doom Skulls. However, it can also create some skulls, which can synergize it by not only getting the purple mana off of that, but then being able to go get some extra turn skulls in order to kind of poke around. It can be a pretty good low rarity option to end up using with it. And it's one of those kind of troops that as we get more things that can create more purple and more skulls simultaneously, as well as double converts that can do both, converting into purple while also doing skulls, we're going to be able to get quite a bit more usage out of this thing, as it has an automatic extra turn. So if you're not frozen, it's going to be getting some basically free skulls if you have a lot of purple mana accumulation while already having a way of creating skulls, and basically using this as your mana dump to for your purple mana in order to have another follow-up on those skulls. So overall, not horrible. I don't feel like it's used much currently, though it's definitely something that can have a decent amount of usage despite being a common. That's kind of a reoccurring theme with this as well, which I don't think I've really gone over too much yet. However, it is something that is very well known among the Gems of War community, of course, is that a lot of low rarity troops can actually still be very viable within the game. There are a lot of commons that are basically common in name only, and we're about to be getting to one of those once we get Thrall. But anyways, Skullfang deals damage to an enemy. Weakest enemy, poisons them. Pretty underwhelming, not really used for much. Sloth, kind of interesting. It is actually the cheapest mana drain that can drain the entire enemy team. It's kind of like Famine, except more annoying. It's only 10 mana cost and drains all mana from all allies and all enemies. So it does drain your own mana as well. However, this isn't necessarily always a bad thing, because you do end up gaining life for all of this mana drain as well. So every single mana that you drain from either an ally or an enemy, you end up gaining 1 life for, which makes him relatively tanky. He has an okay attack base stats, which makes him okay in arena as well. So you can kind of use him, cast him once, and kind of make him unkillable, while also having, I believe, 9 attack, I think is his base, which is pretty high for a common. It's either 8 or 9. I believe it's 9. And then it also gets to, gain life based on its mana drain. I mentioned that. But basically, it's kind of like a Famine before you have Famine. If you want to have, like, the capability of what Famine can do, but you kind of don't have Famine, obviously, because it's pretty bad to bother getting Famine. Plus, it doesn't count for a Kingdom upgrade, so it's generally not something you get unless you just randomly get it as a drop. But it kind of allows you to kind of do that effect off of a common, so kind of cool in that regard. And also, it has a little bit of Explosion at the start. So overall, not horrible, though it's a really slow option, so it's not really used for anything other than arena. Snow Spirit, nothing too special, just some poke damage with a freeze. There's just better options out there. Snowy Owl, however, actually pretty viable. There was a mythic basically made entirely around Snowy Owl's capability, Quadzalma, I believe it was called. But basically, this is the common version of it, and is still pretty viable. It ends up destroying all purple gems and then creates 7 of a chosen color. This can end up being okay, because you could feed right back into yellow if you wanted to. You can go target one of your ally colors. Given that it's destroying all the purple, this can end up making the concentration on the board quite a bit smaller. So if you're destroying like 15 purple, that's 15 less spots that you have to worry about. So you have a higher chance that a 7 gem spawn will end up actually giving you the alignment to actually gain an extra turn, or just gaining mana in general. It also gets to destroy those purple instead of remove, so you do get to accumulate the mana for it. And if you were taking those purple manually, you even have some magic link, though I wish the link was into his yellow. Would be a little bit more convenient, though still not too bad overall. Anyways, yeah, pretty good common. It's not used too often, however, it does have viability. Though it's a very weird one, especially now that Quadzalma exists, because normally Quadzalma is just the superior option if you're going to use that gimmick, though it's way lower mana cost, can make it useful in some situations, and if nothing else, can be used in arena. It's a little bit less viable in arena unless you have a really good thing to feed mana into that specifically needs purple as well as one other color like yellow, overflow. Anyways, Soul Gnome, it's just a useless common gnome as all of them are. Night Spider, we have or Spider Knight, I should say. It just does damage to an enemy and has a web. Overall, pretty useless. Spider Swarm you'd never use onto your team. However, it is summoned off a giant spider, so you do generally want to have it onto your team. Main reason you'd want to is because of Orb Weaver hero class. Orb Weaver ends up doing giant spider. Giant spider does Spider Swarm. Spider Swarm then, in conclusion, gets used for Guild Wars indirectly. Not on your team, but ends up getting summoned. So you do want to have this thing fully maxed just to have a little bit extra stats. Generally, things that tend to get used in commons that can tend to get indirectly or directly used in Guild Wars. You kind of want to make sure you have upgraded. These are things like Bandit, though don't get it fully upgraded. But it's things like Spider Swarm, It's things like Toad, Quasit. These are all like useless stuff that you would never actually use on your team that kind of gets forced on your team depending on situations. So definitely worth upgrading anything that can really ever get summoned in those kind of situations. So as far as Sunsail, pretty useless. It's just a disease with some damage. Transforms a bunch of yellow to brown. Overall, not really doing much. Doesn't even feed back into itself. Taurus, just a kind of a little bit of light splash. Light splash is 25% to the adjacents. It also does it to first enemy, so you're only getting one of those light splashes, so not really doing too much. Does have a little bit of a boost ratio. However, such a ridiculously small boost ratio that's not really getting much damage. So, Thrall. Thrall is... What on earth is Thrall? Thrall is basically the top 10 best troop in the entire game, despite being a common. It is pretty absurd. He has a 6 mana cost, while being able to destroy a bunch of gem. Destroy, of course, means that you accumulate all the mana for it. He takes some damage, however, this damage is so ridiculously low in the current state of the game that is basically irrelevant, and I almost forget he even takes damage sometimes, because it's just so ridiculously low. He has a automatic way of gaining extra turn if there's 13 plus red, so it has synergy with like Zugoff team with Flame of Fur and stuff like that, as well as just a chance of just randomly getting extra turn, even if the destroy itself doesn't get extra turn. It can board clear an entire board pretty consistently within vaults, or not vaults, within, well, you couldn't use it there too if you wanted to, but within delves in the underworld. So you basically get all that extra magic, and even if you're slightly in mid-game or even earlier in the game, you'd likely have enough magic gains because of all the other bonuses to basically have a 64 destroy. And as long as he has at least 64 destroy there, he will full board clear and accumulate every single mana. And ever since explosions were nerfed quite several years back, now they were nerfed down to 70% mana accumulation, then to 50% mana accumulation. Well, this is 100% mana accumulation because you're specifically destroying every individual gems, meaning if there was no skulls on the board, you would get 64 total mana, assuming you had the mana pools to end up filling them. This is insanely good for pretty much every mythic build in the entire game due to how much of mana cost it end up needing. It's obviously really good with every legend. It's really good with basically everything. There's almost no team that wouldn't want to use a Thrall, especially when you can get to those higher ends of magics where it can just do a full board clear. Really insane. And on top of all that, he even has a purple link, making it even easier to get him to full mana, as well as the fact that you're generally going to have at least one other purple onto your team, because you definitely don't want Thrall being your only purple generally. There are some situations where you might, but generally speaking, you want to have one other purple to kind of sink all your purple mana into, since obviously you only need 6, so you're getting way more than 6 purple mana. But he can pretty consistently get his mana back and then kind of sink the extra purple as well into whatever else is on your team, which means that purple link gets even more value. Anyways, yeah, Thrall, insane. Arguably best common in the entire game, arguably top 5 in the entire game. It's insane, the mana accumulator, contested mostly by Leprechaun. Leprechaun's main gimmick is it can get the mana on turn 1, whereas Thrall normally needs turn 2. You also need purple on the starting board, which can lead to a slow start, particularly in Guild Wars if they're just going to empower into an auto win. So there are some situations where it can be weaker. However, overall, absolutely insane, especially for longer battles where you just need a lot of mana. Anyways, Tome of Evil, completely useless. You never bother using this thing on your team. I think there's like one thing that might summon in the game, can't remember, but overall pretty bad. And yeah, just not really something you'd bother using. Treachery, another one of these kind of guardian troops, the ones that deal a counter, ends up specifically countering blues, has some Naga synergy. Overall, I feel like this will become better into the future. Of the 6 of these in this specific category, I feel like it's the second least used. I feel like the War Gear is the least one used. This is probably the second least, though they're both used pretty infrequently. They're definitely the weaker 2 of the 2. However, as more Nagas come into the game, there's definitely going to be some kind of like true damage synergy or something else to go with it. Unfortunately, its damage is physical, so it does have that. However, it still has that Naga extra magic synergy, so we'll just kind of have to see over time. In the current state of the game, not really used. Useless Vault Troop. Troglodyte, useless Guild War Troop. Valraven, useless Vault Troop again. Not really much to say about them. Villager has an interesting thing where it kind of keeps transforming back and forth with a werewolf. Overall, not really that viable to use, so especially since you're generally going to be starting the loop off of werewolf if you're even going to bother using it instead of starting it off of villager. So overall, not really going to be used, and it's if you are using it, you're normally using it with a start of werewolf, so you're pretty much never actually putting villager onto your team specifically, even if you are specifically using it by you having it transform back and forth. Though overall, just not really something you would use. Wall of Bones, one of the weaker walls, however, not the weakest wall of all these kind of like Fortress Gate-like troops. Ends up getting a bunch of armor boosted by undead allies. and then all other allies gain a bunch of attack and mana. Can be okay in Arena. Outside of Arena, not really used much, though. It does have a little bit of Skull Reflect, but overall, pretty underwhelming. War Goat, another one of those kind of underwhelming things, just destroys a row and ends up knocking back the first enemy. Nothing really too special. There's quite a few other better options that end up knocking back and moving the enemy team that you wouldn't really need to bother using. Warhawk is already summoned off of Falconer, so you would never specifically use on your team. The only time you might use on your team is in Arena. It can be an okay draft pick for Arena, though considered compared to Musketeer and stuff like that, it's generally not that viable, especially since you might not have a Hunter's Mark to go with it. You would never actually use it on your team. However, Falconer can summon, so you do generally want to have it upgraded, as there are occasional instances where it's not completely useless to bother using Falconer. It does have some skull dodge. It does end up doing extra skull damage versus Hunter's Mark, and the kind of synergy that ends up getting there is basically just kind of like a Hunter's Mark kind of build kind of thing that you'd only really use it with Falconer. And the last few, Wraith is pretty inconsistent. However, it does have a full mana steal. 50% of this time, it will steal all of the mana from the enemy, and by steal, I mean it gets to accumulate it. So as long as this has at least, or the thing that you're targeting has at least 7 mana and does not have a mean to mana drain, you will gain all of your mana back while also draining all of theirs. It only does this 50% of the time. However, it can be pretty devastating when a Wraith ends up getting a couple of them in a row. So overall, not too bad. Very rarely would you actively use it on your team, though, as there are better mana drainers out there, and its inconsistency of only having a 50% chance obviously makes it so it will fail at some point. Even if you have super good luck, it will eventually not work. So overall, not really too good. However, it can have some viability here and there. This is one of the kind of worm-like troops, despite it not actually being a worm itself. It acts a little bit differently. It deals damage to a random enemy, but it still has that create 7 green gem. So instead of hitting last enemy, it hits a random one. It also gets to do a little bit of a random poison. And it's basically just like the worms, except slightly different, though it does have a half mana start. Kind of interesting. Mostly just used for Arena, not really used in any situation outside of Arena. And to conclude this video for commons, though, we still have 5 more to go do the next 5 days. We have ourselves the zombie. It removes all skulls and then gains a bunch of life, boosted by skulls removed. Pretty useless, not really ever going to be used. And that's just that. Anyways, that is every single common that is currently within Gems of War as of 1,000 troops being added into the game. So if you guys still have any other questions about the commons or anything else you want me to go over, definitely feel free to leave it in the comment section below. So this video, I believe, went out on Tuesday, probably around 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That'll likely be the time we'll get these out every single day then this week. So basically every single day at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll have another one of these videos going out, going over every single troop of a rarity, kind of like how we just did here. So yeah, we'll go from there, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. We will be back on the 13th, which oddly enough, even though it wasn't planned that way, is just in time for the Vault events for the next Nomapalooza, since every Vault event's a Nomapalooza now. So we'll be grinding that quite hard when we get back, probably have a big stream and go from there. But until then, we'll have these videos. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Greatly appreciate it as always. Feel free to leave a like, helps out a lot and is greatly appreciated. And I'll catch you guys later. And if you are still here watching all the way to the end, please feel free to comment. I'm actually really curious how many people watch all the way to the end, watching the entire thing. I'm pretty sure some people are going to kind of watch it almost like a live stream, since it's probably around how long a live stream is. I'm actually not sure how long it is now. I think it's probably getting close to an hour by this point. Actually, yes, I can see it right there. It's almost an hour. The other ones will probably be longer, as commons, oddly enough, have a little bit less of a number to them, which is kind of weird, but it's mostly because not too many commons really come into the game compared to rares and other things, which makes those categories quite a bit higher, which will make the videos even longer. So we got that to look forward to. Anyways, guys, catch you later. Thanks for stopping by and watching. Goodbye, everyone.